This episode of Keys to the Shop is brought to you by Prima Coffee. Whether it's espresso machines, manual brewing devices, or general coffee shop needs, they seek to pursue the most innovative coffee products, both domestic and abroad, to offer their customers. Find out more at prima-coffee.com. This is Keys to the Shop, episode 52, How to Solve Coworker Conflict with Tom Henschel. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFirio. I'm the host for Keys to the Shop, and I am really glad that you decided to join me on this show today. It's going to be a really good one. And real quick, before we get started here, I have to thank our sponsor, Prima Coffee. And if you don't know who Prima Coffee is or what they're about, they are a specialty coffee equipment supplier based out of Louisville, Kentucky, right here where I am. And they have founded their company on the idea of making the best coffee brewing equipment available to the general public. Now, their focus in this endeavor is to curate the best equipment for every need. And that goes for espresso machines, grinders, under-counter fridges. If you go to prima-coffee.com and check out what they have to offer, I'm sure that you're going to be impressed. They have great resources on their website, videos of how to use and break down or clean a ton of equipment. They do a lot of research. They have a big emphasis there on having expertise to help their customers get the right gear to fit their every situation. I know these guys, they are just great professionals, really big supporters of the community and specialty coffee. So go to prima-coffee.com, check out what they have to offer. I know you're going to be satisfied. And my thanks to Prima Coffee for their support of Keys to the Shop and the specialty coffee community. And speaking of community, we are going to be talking about something that is essential to great community in coffee, and that is solving coworker conflict. Now, conflict happens as a matter of course in every relationship. And when you're managing a group of people, when you are involved in a group of people in work, you're going to have conflict. It's just going to happen. And from my perception, I don't know that we as an industry handle conflict that well. You know, most people who are in coffee tend to be on the young side because it's an entry-level job. And so by the time you get older, I think you develop more interpersonal skills. You've picked up some tricks for solving conflict. But, you know, the catch-22 here, if I'm using that phrase correctly, is by the time you're older, you might not be a barista. So what can we do as an industry to, engage in great conversations around conflict that will bring a peaceful resolution? Where conflict comes up, that is just a matter of course. How it's dealt with is another matter altogether. And if we want a healthy coffee community, which I think we all do, both locally within our own store and when we gather together at trade shows and competitions, we are going to benefit from having a few more tools in our tool belt to navigate these conflicts. And to help us with that, I am really excited to welcome Tom Henschel to the show. So Tom Henschel is the host of The Look and Sound of Leadership, which is an amazing podcast. It's one of the top career development podcasts out there. And I've been aware of that podcast for a while, been a fan of Tom's for a bit. So I was really excited to be able to get an opportunity to bring him on the show because I've been impacted by his work through the podcast for so long. And I know that it's going to be beneficial for you as well. But beyond his great podcast, Tom is also the president of the executive development firm Essential Communications, and he is a founding coach at the consulting firm Corporate Coaching International, and he is the senior coach with ARIA Consulting, Arden Coaching, and Executive Coaching Connections. His expertise in communications coaching has, led him into the offices of such companies as Warner Brothers, Dole, 3M, Boeing, 20th Century Fox, and Disney, just to name a few. So in addition to all this, he is a classically trained actor from the Juilliard School Drama Division and was a professional actor for more than 20 years and appeared in over 100 plays, films, and episodes of television. He is an award-winning director in the theater. Productions under his direction garnered 13 Theater Critics Awards, including 5 for him personally as Best Director. So communications is something that Tom Henschel knows something about. And in this conversation today, Tom breaks down for us the tools we need to have these kinds of difficult conversations, these conflict conversations that create tension in our ranks. And I think he does a fantastic job of breaking this down. I know for a fact that I benefited from listening to and participating in the conversation. I even got to try my hand at a little bit of acting, and I don't think that I will become an actor. But anyway, it's going to be a great episode. So I'm excited to present to you my interview with Tom Henschel on solving coworker conflict. All right, Mr. Tom Henschel, welcome to Keys to the Shop. So pleased to have you here.
Thanks. I'm so glad to be here.
I'm a big fan of your podcast. I've said this in our intro here in this episode, but the look and sound of leadership has really helped me in my career, and definitely recommend people check that out. And on your podcast, it's executive coaching tips, and it's a short episode, but it's packed full of content on things like social skills, developing relationships, communication, and what's the tagline you're famous for on your show? That to be perceived in the workplace
the way you want to be perceived.
Yes. And that really hooked me into the show. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, you're welcome. I'm glad you're listening, and I'm so glad to be with you and your listeners.
One of the things that you bring up a lot on the show, like we just were talking about the social skills aspect and developing relationships in work can be difficult sometimes because we bring with us who we are all the time. Like we don't just leave who we are at home, and we are all very unique people. So when we come to work, we're gathered together with others. Inevitably, there's going to be conflict of some kind, even if you're gathered for the most noble of goals.
Right.
And so conflict seems like it goes hand in hand, like we have to address it sometime. Where do you think that conflict comes from, even in the best intentioned relationships?
Well, I think one is because we have feelings about what's ever happening. And the second one is because we usually don't have very good skills around it. I certainly didn't grow up with great skills being modeled in my house for conflict. And by the way, not because my parents fought a lot, but because they didn't fight at all. And at least not in front of us, And so I learned no skills at all. And when it came my turn to start being an adult and having relationships and kind of fighting for what I wanted, I didn't have a clue how to do it, and I was a mess. And the truth is, it's just behavior. I mean, having better skills can get you better results.
So not modeling conflict, I've definitely seen that at play in other people's lives where it knocks you off kilter when you first experience it, and it's a shock.
I think whatever's different from what you grew up with looks wrong. If you grew up in a house where there's a lot of fighting doesn't look wrong at all. Then it's when people don't fight, then that looks wrong, whatever.
We can really only, I've said this on the show before, we can really only control ourselves and what we do with our minds and our speech and how we act in the workplace and at home. So this is something that I think is the focus of today's episode, is basically how to effectively bring resolution to conflict, or even avoid conflict and turn it into a conversation. So there are some good ways and bad ways to confront conflict when it comes up. What is a bad way to do it?
Well, I think a bad way to do it is with blame. A bad way to do it is assuming that I know the truth and you're wrong.
Mm.
So anything that creates a kind of black and white thinking, positional thinking, right-wrong thinking, that's going to create more tension. It's not going to get as good an outcome.
I forget the author of who said this, that this relates to blame. They're talking about different reasons why I'm not successful or why something didn't happen that I wanted to happen. And on that list, what was missing was me. You weren't on the list. And so I can see that for sure. Like, we don't consider ourselves as part of the equation, and we probably are a lot of the times.
Well, look, I mean, we're having feelings, so we're in it, right? I mean, if we weren't having feelings, it wouldn't be a difficult conversation. So, yeah, as long as I'm having feelings, I'm in it in some way.
Right. And so how we are in it and the manner in which we conduct ourselves, now that we're in it, whether we wanted it or not, will determine the outcome and probably the, success of your role if you let it. So what is generally the best way, like the best position to approach it from?
Well, to make it really, really simple, approach it with curiosity. Look, I don't know what you're thinking about this situation. I can tell you what I'm thinking about this situation. To approach it like that, I'm curious. I'm curious what you think, because I am curious what you think, so that we can maybe find some resolution. So that's very different than the first way, right? The blame way, the right, wrong way, the, positional way. This is a way where it's like, okay, let's see, let's talk about it, let's figure it out.
And so it's a little bit, seems kind of stoic.
Oh, that's interesting. I think what you can do is talk about your feelings. It's not that you're not having them, but it's not acting on the feelings. And if that's what you mean by stoic, then yes, I would say that's true. The truth is, if you are acting on your feelings, in other words, whatever happened has made me angry, and now I'm going to act angry, well, I'm not going to have a good conversation at that point because I'm being hijacked. My emotions are speaking for me. This is actually an important little piece, if you don't mind me talking about this.
Oh, go right ahead.
So what we know now about the brain is that the feelings happen in this teeny little, olive pit of the brain that's way in the back, and it's really ancient. And the part of us that talks about our feelings is in the front of our brain. So they're not even close to each other, and they are completely separate. And this idea that if I have to tell you about my feelings, I probably can't have the feelings, that's a good thing. If I'm just acting angry, boy, people are going to be scared of me, and we're certainly not going to have meaningful dialogue. And, I can't even hear you when you talk to me because I'm flooded with all that anger. That's that little tiny part of my brain that's hijacked me. When I can talk about my feelings, hey, Chris, I'm really upset about something that happened this afternoon. I really want to talk to you about it. And I'm going to try and keep the talking part online and not get hijacked. I'm trying to keep a different part of my brain active. I will get a different result.
Yeah, an objective position, at least, in not the one that feels the best. Because, let's be honest, if you're acting out of anger when you're angry, it's like a tall glass of cold water on a hot day. It feels great to you in the moment, but
right. I love the fact that you acknowledge it does feel great. I mean, to be riding on the wave of those emotions often feels powerful, and we suddenly become articulate. Boy, I know that for me, it used to be when I was taken over by these blinding rages, I would get very quiet and very articulate, and I thought I was hot stuff. And when those moments took me over, I'm serious, there was a part of me that celebrated, like, oh, here it is. I am powerful now.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm with you. It can feel really exhilarating. It can feel strong. And yes, I agree with you. In the long run, it is usually not a good thing.
It's actually doing the opposite of what you think it is because of that hijack that's happening in your brain that is telling you that this is a good thing, but it's actually destroying things around you.
I think it comes down to deciding what you want, right? Look, do you want to be right? okay, then you can argue for your position and you can take a position and draw a line between us and divide us up. And if you want to be right, good luck with that, man. I mean, good luck. But if you want to get a different outcome, like maybe you want to get ahead in your career, maybe you would actually like to make it a better place to work, maybe you would like to have a better experience of yourself and others, well, then you can't just fight to be right. Because when you fight to be right, you're picking a fight. I think part of the whole thing here around conflict is, what do you really, really want?
Well, I think most of us would say we want there to be resolution. In the moment, we might say we want to be right, but at our most peaceful and objective self, we probably would just say, I just want to work and do what I was hired to do without having these things happen.
But wait a second. Don't you hear people in your workplace say things like, I want respect?
Oh, sure.
Well, now, pardon me, I don't mean to start us on a whole new conversation, but I think respect is a completely false concept. I talk with people all the time that like respect is completely made up. But I know some people who want respect and they will fight for it. They don't want resolution. What you just said, They don't. They want to be right about this thing called respect. So it's like, well, they're not going for resolution. They just want their respect. So I think people can want all kinds of things. And that's why we have feelings, and not everybody's the same. It's part of why what's interesting is the social scientists who study this stuff and who observe the same stuff over and over. It kind of doesn't matter what the actor in the situation wants. They might want respect. They might want whatever they want. But the same behaviors often get better results. And that's what's interesting to me. No matter where you start from, going through the same doors helps people.
So now that we're in a position where, let's say that we have pulled ourselves away from the hijack, and we are in this position of being curious, or we're at least trying to view this objectively, there are some tools that you recommend as 3 conversations that we can engage in that will help, and also they can be done in an unhealthy way too. I wonder if you can explain a little bit about those, and if we can explore what those conversations are, so that people listening to this might be nodding their heads like, yeah, I did that today. I'm really aggravated that I did that, or they're really just aggravated with their coworkers still and are searching for a solution. And it sounds like these would be pretty solid solutions.
Well, they are certainly behaviors to try, and usually they're new for people. And yes, these conversations exist. And yes, I think they can be done in a kind of unconscious way without a lot of kind of skill, and you get a poorer result. When you get conscious of these 3 conversations, because they're there anyway, and when you start attending to them, yes, you tend to get a better result. So I'm thrilled that we get to talk about these. So I'm just going to name them. So the first conversation is the what happened conversation. The second conversation, which you and I have already talked a little bit about, the second conversation is the feelings conversation. And the third one is the identity conversation. So what happened, feelings, and identity. And again, the premise that I'd like everybody to be thinking about is, when I'm in a heated conversation, and it might be at work, but it might be, with my sister, it doesn't matter who I'm having this conversation with, but when I'm having feelings about something, usually these conversations happen anyway. And if you can begin to hear them come out of your mouth or hear them come out of the mouth of the other person and then begin to identify them, and I don't mean to use that word again, but if you can begin to kind of recognize them and then attend to them, it makes things go better.
So tell us about, let's explore the first one, the what happened, because it sounds like, for instance, when we're on bar making coffee, there is very little time to actually, in a busy shift, address issues in a meaningful way without letting things die down, recuperate, and then sit down and say, hey, what happened? And it sounds like this is kind of where we're going with this.
Yes, that's really interesting. You made it about having a time out. In other words, we're not going to talk in the moment, we're going to talk later, which may or may not be true. And the what happened story to me, as I define it, is simply this. What we know now happens in the world is that if we put 6 people in a room and then have an incident happen, it might be staged violence, it might be a a conversation between two people. It doesn't matter what it is. It might be somebody having an accident. The 6 observers who were not in it at all, there's probably going to be 8 versions of what happened. And that's inevitable. And we know that's true. And some things will match, but many things will not. And they all were side by side in the same room watching the same thing at the same time. We just don't experience things the same way. It's not that anybody's right or wrong, but now imagine that you were an actor in it. You were doing the thing I'm going to talk to you about, right? Your lens is completely different than mine. So, or maybe you and I were just observing the third person doing something. We're still going to have different stories. So the what happened story means that I'm going to approach it as opposed to the right wrong, as opposed to the blame. I'm going to approach it with some curiosity, which says, Chris, look, I know you were in the room. I don't know what you saw. I want to tell you what I saw, and I'd really like to hear what you saw. And maybe we're talking about a third person. Maybe we weren't even in it, right? But that idea that there is a what happened conversation that needs to it needs to occur, and that I am not the only person who has the quote unquote truth with a capital T. Just not possible.
Sounds like an olive branch extended out to the person, especially if it's just with you and them directly, like not discounting them and issuing a judgment on them, but involving them in the solution.
Well, at least acknowledging that I don't know everything. Right? Because as soon as I say to you, look, I don't know what it looked like from your side, what you understand is I'm not going to fight you over what's right. Because if you and I are going to fight about what happened, you're going to be pissed off, or I'm going to be pissed off, because we're never going to agree anyway. We could prove that scientifically, that we won't agree on what happened. So let's just start from that premise. Is it an olive branch? I don't know, because again, I may have things to tell you about how I experienced you. I may have things to tell you about what I saw that is upsetting to me that may not be an olive branch, but at least I can acknowledge that you will have a different version. And your version is as valid as mine, by the way. They have to coexist. So I'm not going to try and obliterate yours. I'm not going to try and wipe it out. I'm not going to tell you, because that's what we do when we say you're wrong, is no. No. My version has to be the major only version. My version has to be the truth. So you have to be wrong. But when I go, look, I understand you've got a truth and I've got a truth and they coexist. Don't wipe mine out and I won't wipe yours out. That's a different way to come at the conversation, right?
Yeah, completely. So from there, let's say we're having that conversation where we're dialoguing now about what happened. Where do we go from there?
So at some point, I get to tell you what I saw. And now I'm going to tell you that I have some feelings about it. Because that's what makes, I think to me, that's what makes this not just a manager's feedback conversation, right? If I were a manager giving you feedback about the way you make a drink, about the way you talk to a customer, about the way you, ring things up, I've just got some feedback for you because I've been watching you. Now I've got a what happened story, and you know what? Mine's the one I need you to act on. This is now just a management conversation about your performance. I don't have feelings about it. I'm just your manager. But when I come at you and say, I feel like I'm not getting respected, when I feel like something you're doing is impacting me, I have feelings about it. So the reason I'm talking to you is because I am upset, because I am something. So my point is, my version of what happened evokes feelings in me, and I want to tell you about them. They are actually important. It's usually the reason I'm having this conversation at all, is because I have feelings.
Why is it important? Why is it important that we communicate about our feelings to the other person?
The question becomes around impact. So, look, let's pretend that there are no feelings in it. Let's pretend that you're my manager and you come up and say, I've been watching how you do this thing at the end of all your transactions with customers, and I don't know if you're aware of what you're saying, but I'd like to tell you. Now, I'm going to hear that and I'm going to go, oh, the reason this is important is because of the impact it's having on an exchange. If you're a really good manager, you're going to tell me what the impact is of what I'm doing. Like when you ring it up this way, then there's a problems with the books. When you make a drink this way, whatever the problem would be, right? You're going to tell me the impact of my behavior and why I need to change it. Same is true now in this difficult conversation. It is my hope, Chris, that when I come to you and tell you I'm upset about something, and here's my version of what happened, and what's your version of what happened? Okay, well, look, with my version of what happened, when I experienced it that way, I had some feelings about it. What I hope is you're going to hear the impact, and I hope that you're going to care.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you would hope. Yeah.
Right, and some people don't care. Some people say, but right? Some
Yeah.
people go, tough, I don't care. Like, boo-hoo, get over it. But my hope is that my reason for bringing it up to you will be important to you. So my feelings in some way are the impact statement. When you do that thing that I saw, I have this feeling, and it's really uncomfortable for me, or it's really upsetting for me, or it makes me angry, or whatever it is. And now we get to talk about that.
I was just thinking about this as we're discussing it, because somehow I always turn back to Danny Meyer in his book, Setting the Table. One of the qualities of management that he looks for in his managers at his restaurants in New York is charitable assumption, in the ability to say to or view another person as a person too, just like yourself, who probably means well. So it sounds like if you think like that, you'd be more likely to share your feelings with that person.
Yes. I love the idea of charitable assumption. I want to just tell you really briefly, the woman who mentored me when I was learning how to be a coach, she used to say to me all the time, Tom, if the client, the person I'm coaching is called a client, right? If the client could do better, she would do better. And I would go, but she's an idiot. I mean, because I was very much in right and wrong when I started coaching. And I would look at these people and go, what's wrong with them? Like, holy crap, don't they see? And she would always say, if they could do better, they would do better. It's charitable assumption. So by the way, just think about it. If I come to you and I'm upset about something and I can give you a charitable assumption, wow, that's really going a long way. That would be fantastic.
Sure. And it would seem like when you don't do that, or when you have the opposite of charitable assumption, which I imagine is simply to write somebody off as incapable of receiving your feelings or your feedback, then that's when it really goes off the rails.
Well, yes. And I think, by the way, the opposite of charitable assumption is jumping to conclusions, looking for ulterior motives. I know why you did that. You did that to make me look bad. Like, whoa, well, that's a story. Like, and by the way, that is certainly not a charitable assumption, right?
Sure.
But we think things like that all the time. You did that to do X, Y, Z to me.
And that's a story. It's a story we tell ourselves about the other person.
Right. It's completely made up, right? I am making up your intentions. Look, the truth of the matter is, I think it is hard for any of us as individuals to know our own intentions really, truly. But we make up stories all the time about other people's intentions. You know, she only does that because she wants to suck up to the boss. She only does that because she thinks it gets her better tips. It's like, wait a second, how do you know? How do you know what she's doing and what she's thinking? You know, give it a break.
Yeah, we're all the heroes of our own story.
Yeah, right. And consequently, we make others wrong, or others victims, or others blaming, or what. Yes, right, exactly.
Mm-hmm. So we've got this conversation going now with somebody where we're having the what happened conversation, listening to perspectives. And now that we've kind of broached that topic, we're talking now about feelings. And
Yes.
they could have feelings too, and we also have
Right.
feelings. The next phase is this identity conversation. What does that look like?
Well, this is something that you might talk about or you might not. What the identity conversation really needs to be clear of is in your own head, which is this. You would not be having feelings if your identity were not wrapped up in it. In other words, I'm going to say it now as a positive. The only reason you're having feelings is because your identity is in the game somewhere. The identity as in what I think about myself or what I think others think of me. My identity is in this. So if this is allowed to stay, like Chris, the way you talk to me, if that is allowed, now I may or may not be saying this out loud to you, I'm just saying what my inner dialogue is. Chris, if the way you talk to me, if I allow that to stand, if I don't stand up for myself, then I'm a coward, right?
Yeah.
It's my identity, right? If I allow you to treat me like that, then, you know, I'm a wimp or whatever it is. we make up all kinds of stories. I'm demanding that you respect me, right? All that kind of stuff. That's my identity talking. That's not a feeling. That's my identity, that I feel like you don't respect me. That's my ego in it. And ego's not a bad word. Ego's a thing like hair or eyebrows, right? We all have it and we need to take care of it. But we do, right? I mean, so ego is healthy, but that is my ego speaking when I say, you don't respect me, right?
Yeah.
If she thinks that about me, she'll fire me because I will be worthless, right? Like, what? Wow, that's your identity talking.
That's jumping
right?
to conclusions not about another person, but about yourself.
Well said. Really well said. But that is what our feelings tell us, by the way. Our feelings tell us something about ourselves. Protect yourself. Guard yourself. Stand up for yourself. You've been wronged. You've been victimized. You should be ashamed, right? They're telling us things about ourselves, and that's why we have the feelings in the first place. So one of the things I want to say to people is, if you're going to try and have any one of these three conversations, if you're going to try and get a better outcome from this thing that you, Chris, are calling conflict, then I want to say don't have it when you're in the middle of the feeling. Just don't. Now, when I begin to talk to you again tomorrow morning, it might stir up the feelings again, but at least I will have had some time out when I'm not in the feeling to think about it. What do I think happened? What are my feelings? And by the way, what do I think my feelings are laced to? What are they strapped to? What is it? Because if I could figure that out, I might be able to have a different conversation. I might be able to come to you and say, listen, Chris, I just want to tell you that thing that happened yesterday, I got really upset when I saw it because you know what? I really felt like if our manager saw that I would get in trouble. Because I had the night to think about it and I could get clear about that's really what I think. That if our manager saw that, I would get in trouble.
Now, that is a conversation that I don't think probably happens very often, at least not to my...
Me either.
Yeah. What I feel like happens most of the time, and I'm guilty of this just as much as anybody else, is looking out for yourself on the bar, looking out for your career, telling those stories to yourself about the people that you work with who are either impeding your career or you're just demonizing others around you because of what they've done to you, and you just don't talk about it. And there's always this kind of chagrin, that moment where the person ends up coming to you where they can sense in you that you have something that's upset you. And you knew you were supposed to come to that person and talk about this with them. Now they're the one having this conversation with you.
Isn't that interesting that your feelings are leaking out all over the place and they are creating a bad result, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
Right. Can I just ask a quick question just to be sure about something?
Mm-hmm.
So that thing that I modeled for you, hey, Chris, when that happens, I'm concerned that my manager is going to think bad of me or whatever.
Yeah.
When I modeled that and you said that doesn't happen much, I agree it doesn't. But do you think it might be effective, or do you think it doesn't happen much because it sucks? Or what do you think about what I did?
Oh, no, I think that's great. I think that it's the way I followed up with it was as hopefully is to say, like, maybe some people in the audience are thinking, I've never seen that happen, or that doesn't happen enough. And the novelty of it, I think, is impactful to say, like, let's create a new normal around around this idea that we're talking about now, which is having these back and forth conversations where we're coming together for a solution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to say briefly, which is I certainly did not grow up speaking like that. My parents didn't. None of my teachers did. Like, I didn't learn that when I was a kid. No adults were modeling that for me. Since I've been in the career that I'm in, where there's a whole bunch of us who are focused on personal growth and professional development, there's a whole community of people who actually do talk like that, and it's unbelievable. It's so cool. It's just like, wow, these people are good, and it's amazing to be around them. It's inspiring.
Yeah.
So it's not that nobody does it, but I agree with you, most people don't. Because by the way, we were never taught it.
In our industry, oftentimes it isn't something that we feel empowered to do. We don't feel like like it's going to come out right if we do talk about it. And that's my hope with what we're talking about today is, identifying these three things, which you're saying are just a part of the conversation, whether you intend them to be or not, you're engaging in them. Is that right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
So you want to kind of use the tools that you already are using, but just use them in a better way. I wonder if you might be able to model what an effective flow of one of those conversations look like.
Can I begin with a slightly different, just a different framework, which is, I think it begins in thinking about what you want to say. Like, why am I bringing this up at all? In other words, if I'm not going to talk when I'm hijacked by my feelings, if I'm going to take a little time out, whether it's 10 minutes or overnight or whatever it is, one of the things that I want to figure out is, why am I going to bring this up? So Tom, I'm going to talk to you, Chris, about something. What do I want? And that's before the flow happens, I just want to say, I'm going to get to think about all three of those things, right? I'm going to think about what happened. I'm going to think about my feelings, and I'm going to think about my identity. So that's where the flow really starts, is deciding whether I want to have this conversation at all. So
good point.
So that's that. Once we're in it, I think often it can be really helpful to have a kind of opening statement once you are seated or whatever you're going to do, to know that you've got at least a few minutes to start with, something happened and I want to tell you how it made me feel. So right there, again, now the person listening is probably going to go, right? Like, oh my God, we're going to have a feelings conversation? Like, you know what I mean? But if you can kind of make it, and you're not acting out, you're not acting angry, whatever, but if you can kind of talk calmly, I'd like to talk with you about what happened, and I'd like to tell you how it made me feel, because it was really upsetting for me. Mm-hmm. I don't know if hearing that from me would upset you. Would it? I don't know. How would that be, Chris, if you heard that?
I feel like I might be anxious because I will take an inventory in my head of all the things that I've done in the last few days to see what did I do, what did I say. But personally, I think maybe I'd be relieved that somebody was going to give me some honest feedback.
Great. And by the way, it is not my intention for this to be a feedback conversation, because I'm not necessarily trying to get you to change your behavior. Not necessarily. This is not like I'm your manager saying you have to talk differently to the customers. So this is not about feedback. It's about an experience I had that evoked something in me. Mm-hmm. So I want to be clear that, and again, maybe I'm splitting hairs here with you, but I think of feedback as a way to modify your performance in the workplace.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay, but I don't think necessarily this is it. Like, this is not me as a manager talking to you.
Oh, certainly. I don't think we would want to come off as having any, if we're coworker to coworker, you never want to assume the position of an authority where you have not been given that authority.
So listen, can I ask, rather than talking kind of theoretically about all this, could you give me an example of a situation that might be a real conflict? And let's talk about how it would go down.
Tom, I'm glad you asked, because I have written down some actual scenarios that I feel like I've experienced, and I just know that we've experienced this in the coffee community. No doubt everyone has at some point. So let's look at the first one. And these are written in a way that's sort of like a fictitious email sent to asking for advice around this subject. So here's the first one. My coworker is not pulling their weight, but they still get tips. How do you approach that? I mean, obviously that might happen more than we want it to. How do we approach that?
So first off, I just want to say that simple little sentence, the first part of the sentence is the what happened. My coworker is not pulling their weight, right? That's a what happened story. And they still get tips. I'll bet I have feelings about it, and it's my identity. Why are they getting tips when blah, 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 right? It's something about me, right?
Yeah.
Like, because look, if my identity weren't in it, if I didn't care, what difference would it make? But when it's upsetting to me, it's because my identity's in it. So I just want to say that sentence is loaded already. So now who do I want to talk to about this? Like, can you just play this out with me, Chris? Like,
yeah,
I understand that I'm upset, right? Let's pretend I wrote that. I'm upset, but who would I possibly want to talk to about that?
I imagine you're going to want to talk to the person who is, in your eyes, lazy.
Oh, so I've got a big judgment about that person.
Mm-hmm.
And why do I want to have a conversation to say to this person? Let's imagine this is Barbara, okay? Why would I want to say to Barbara, you're lazy? What would I possibly get out of that conversation?
I feel like it would justify my anger a little bit, and it would also, I would want to solve a situation that I think is unfair to me.
And let me just ask, what's unfair to me? What is unfair?
It's the monetary aspect in this case.
And let me just ask, do tips get split?
Yeah, I mean, for most bars, I would say tips would get split evenly according to the people that work that particular time frame. So if it's uneven work and even tips, then here you go.
Yeah. Okay. So again, will you be the person who wrote it, and can I be Barbara?
Yeah.
So will you just come at me with this whole story you've made up that I'm lazy and it's not fair, and go ahead, bring it on, and let's see what happens.
So, Barbara, I wanted to talk to you because over the past couple of weeks, I've been noticing that I've just been working a lot, and there's been a lot of times where I feel like I'm maybe doing most of what's on the checklist. And I know that we're supposed to have conversations with customers, and there's hospitality involved in our job, but I feel like it's a little unfair to put all of the work on me, and we split the work evenly. I think that's just fair.
And I think we are splitting the work evenly. That's my experience.
So in my experience, though, I feel like when you look at the checklist, my initials are on most of the boxes, and then when we leave, we split tips, and I feel like a lot of that is definitely because of work that you've done, but the care for the coffee bar has come down to my shoulders, and so I wonder what kind of a solution can we find here?
What kind of solution do you want? Now, time out for a sec. I think you're doing a nice job. I just want to say, one of the things that I think you're doing really nicely is using words like my experience is. If I wanted to argue with you, I would be able to state my own experience. Now, you and I might have different versions and whatever, but I just want to say, Chris, I think you're doing a nice job of opening the door for the what happened conversation.
Great.
Can I address the whole premise of this conversation? Because I think I hear this as an identity conversation of it's not fair.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just ask, like, who said it was ever going to be fair ever? Like, what's fair? That's so made up.
Sure.
Like, Barbara's doing her best. You're doing your best. You do more than she does. Look, I grew up with a brother who anytime there was a project to do in the house, he suddenly had to go to the bathroom. It just was a joke. Like, oh, Steve's in the bathroom. You know what I mean? And look, I loved Steve. I mean, he was my brother, but he never pulled his weight around certain stuff. Life's not fair. So what? I just want to say, part of what I'm saying here now is, in the shop, with your workers, this whole idea of fairness, it's really an identity issue, because you know what? Whatever Barbara is doing or isn't doing is actually none of your business. Do your job. It's your manager's job to manage her performance. It's not yours. If she is not pulling her weight, you can talk to the manager if you want to, but why are you talking to Barbara about what she's doing and not doing? You get to split the tips. Shut up. Take your tips and go home.
That's hard. That's a hard pill to swallow, and I to be honest, I don't know how I don't know how I would react in that situation where, if I knew a manager wasn't going to handle it, we want to handle it ourselves.
Well, and I just want to say good luck with that, because at some point I think Barbara's going to say, what are you, my manager?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Exactly.
I just wonder why Barbara would be willing to literally change her performance because you think it's not fair. So part of what I'm pushing back on here is about whether this is a conversation worth having at all ever. Because I don't know that there can ever be a good outcome because you want her to do something differently. Why would she? Why would she care? Look, I think it's hard enough for me to like put the cap on the toothpaste. You know, if you and I are living together and we're in a committed relationship and you've been asking me for 7 years to put the cap on the toothpaste, it's not that I don't love you. It's like, oh, I can't remember. It's just not in my head. It's not what I do. Why would Barbara change how she works because of you? Why would that happen?
So do we then change the way that, how do we change the way we perceive a person in that situation so that we can at least solve the conflict within ourselves?
I don't like what she does. It's not that she's lazy. Lazy is name calling. Lazy is a judgment. Lazy is full of right and wrong and blame and finger pointing. But look, I don't like this part of her, whatever part. Because by the way, I'm guessing that there's some parts of Barbara that you are willing to live with that are good, right? Maybe she's great with customers. Maybe she's really fantastic on that one machine. Maybe whatever. I mean, maybe she's always happy. I don't know. But, you know, some part of you don't like that part of her. Well, fine. Boy, that part of her just makes me so upset. And it's none of my business and it's out of my control. I live in Los Angeles. I can't control the way people drive. And it can be upsetting because it can feel really dangerous, like my life is at stake. But it's not in my control. I'm not going to stop my car and have a conversation with the person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is a conversation that might not even need to happen. So we need to address, you know, what's inside of us and come to terms with it. Now, there might be a conversation where we do have to actually confront the person about something that's happening, just because, you know, otherwise we're not going to feel our best at work, and we're not going to, maybe we don't know how to solve it within ourselves without actually hashing it out.
Then great. Can I take a whack at it real quickly?
Yeah.
And you be Barbara?
Sure.
I think what I would like to hear, if I were doing it as well as I could, what I would like to hear come out of my mouth is something like this. Barbara, I've been thinking a lot about you because I'm aware that many days I leave work and I'm upset. And it's not your fault, but I want to tell you what's happening. What's happening is that when I just look, for example, at the boxes on the checklists, I see my initials over and over and over and over, and I don't see yours. And so it feels unfair to me, like I'm working harder than you. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's how it feels to me. And so I'm upset. And I don't know how it is for you. I don't know how you even think about your work, but I want to tell you that some days I am really upset.
Well, I'm definitely working. I know that because I leave work tired, and definitely.
So can I do a timeout with you? I'm sorry, but
Yeah.
Can I do a timeout with you? Just to help your listeners about what I modeled there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering whether you think it would be effective imagining the person that we're talking to. What I just did, if someone could do something like that, what do you think?
I think it would be good. I think conversations between employees need to happen more often, in especially ones that are accountability conversations, because the assumption here, I think, is that both people have signed on to a particular set of rules. And so if they are therefore going to hold one another accountable, which oftentimes is necessary because they might not have a strong manager, then I think this would be useful.
Even saying things like, I leave work some days upset and that kind of stuff, you think it would be okay to have that conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when we've already given the premise that you don't have this conversation when you're having the feelings.
Great. Okay, cool.
So if this kind of thing happens between baristas, let's say, more often, I think we would find situations that kind of get pushed underground and they metastasize into bitterness or entitlement or whatever it is. They would be shown the light of day by this conversation. So that is a good, one example of many, I'm sure, that could be given that I think is useful for us in our industry to take and use as our own.
Great.
So I want to use another scenario, and I think we probably have time for one or two more here. So let's say I really don't like the way my coworker works and interacts with customers. Everyone seems to be fine with it, and they even celebrate it. They love the way they are, but I find it personally grating, and it's distracting.
Fun. Let's do it. You want to take a whack at it and like talk to me as if I'm the problem?
Yeah, okay, so I'm going to be somebody who comes to, we'll call him Mark. And Mark is definitely loved, but I find it personally grating. So, hey, Mark, I wanted to talk to you about the, it's something that's not technically, it's not a problem, but for me, it's been just weighing on me a little bit. There are things that you do on the bar with customers that I think people receive really well. Sometimes I'm not so sure though, and I don't know if it's a difference thing between you and me, the way our styles, but there are times when I find myself distracted from my work, and I'm not sure if customers feel the same thing, but I know that it's distracting me, and sometimes it bothers me.
Wow. Well, I would love to hear what you're seeing because it's not my intention to bother you. And if it's not working for the customers, I'd like to know. So thanks for bringing it up.
Well, that would go really well then if we had.
Wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Right. If we both come with curiosity.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And it's a hard choice for me, by the way. Right. It's a hard choice for anyone. It's like I'm clearly under attack here. Clearly you're coming to me and saying you don't like something I'm doing. And I have to choose to calm myself down and be curious and not go into defensive mode and not think you're like, not get all stirred up by my feelings, not want to argue about what happened, and not get hijacked. My identity is threatened. So yeah, so if I do that, there is no conflict, right?
Right.
So if we're really talking about conflict, we might talk about it on either side. Like if I'm coming to you and you're now Mark, if I'm coming to you, that I need to come with curiosity. But also, by the way, the day that somebody comes to me and says, we see that you've been, upset and pissed off for the last, 3 days. Like, what the hell's going on with you? It's hard for me to let go of all that and just go, really? What have you seen? Tell me about that. It's hard to show up with curiosity.
Yeah.
But it certainly stops the conflict, doesn't it?
It stops the conflict. And I think that curiosity linked back to charitable assumption is important too, because another scenario might just be where somebody says something that we take the wrong way, that tweaks our nose a little bit, so to speak. And we think about it, and it's like a bug in our ear, like we're not able to shake it. So we have to ask what they meant. And maybe sometimes we don't follow up and it just kind of goes away a little bit, but comes back later. That's a hard scenario to deal with too, because it's in the middle of a rush of customers. Somebody says something to you about getting another milk out of the fridge, and you thought that they had an attitude when they said it. I find that those kinds of conflicts are more common on the bar. In their commonness, they can lead to some pretty intense results.
I love what you said about charitable assumption, right? Because if I think that you had some tone in your voice when you asked me to get the milk, if I have a charitable assumption, then I cannot come to the conclusion that you were being snotty or, you think I'm an idiot or right. I just can't if I have a charitable assumption. So I think it's important for people to really kind of have some sense of their own calibration. If they tend to calibrate that people are doing things, yes, for their own reasons, but not with ulterior motive, well, they're going to have a sunnier day. If I'm walking through the world assuming that I'm a victim because everybody else has got it in for me, and then there's no charitable assumption in that. I love that you brought that back into the conversation, Chris. That's just terrific.
It's a way of viewing the world, I think, that I'm still working on myself. And, it's on the good days, it's great. On the bad days, it's normal.
Yeah. Amen. But I think it is what many of us are working on in our own development, right? Is having a charitable assumption towards the world. Yeah. And not being kind of grumpy and pissed off all the time.
which can feel great.
Right, which can feel great. Yeah. Can I just do a quick reality check? Because one of the things that I heard in the question that you wrote that I'd like to talk about. The way you wrote it, which was so great, the person who's writing says, everyone else seems fine with it. They even celebrate it, but I find it grating. And there's a part of me as a coach, that if I heard a client of mine say that to me, I would say, well, how is it for you that you're the outlier here? Like, does that happen often where you say everyone else seems fine with it? Really, like everybody's in a circle and you're outside the circle. How is that for you? And what do you think that means? And right? Because there's something really interesting. Yeah. I'm having a problem with it, but no one else is. Like, maybe the problem is you.
Yeah. We don't factor ourselves in, the viewer of the situation, for sure. It's embarrassing. If I realized, early on in my career that part of the way that people respond to me is due to the way that they perceive my face and the way I look angry a lot. My wife's always telling me to smile, and I'm a lot better at that today. But I remember a girl I hired as a barista who eventually became a manager, just an amazing worker. She didn't have a problem with me when we were working together, but she confided in me that when she was a customer before I hired her, she was scared of me. And if I'm perceiving her reactions to me without realizing what I'm putting out there into the world, I'm just in this perpetual chasing my own tail mode without ever finding a solution, which is, hey, why don't you just be nicer to look at?
Yeah, right. And boy, I don't know how you experienced it, but that woman gave you a gift.
Yes, I agree.
Now, she didn't do it when she was a customer. She needed to build some trust with you to do it, but what a gift to hear that about yourself, right?
Yeah, and nobody gets enough feedback about themselves to take action. So soliciting feedback oftentimes is necessary.
Yes, and just because you ask for feedback doesn't mean you get it, and certainly doesn't even mean that you get good feedback. Usually it takes 3 or 4 or 5 safe tries putting your hand in the trap, meaning if I have feedback for you, that I put my hand in the trap and realize it doesn't get cut off before I give you good feedback. I mean, I think we do this in our intimate relationships all the time. We're pretty slow to say, I'm really pissed with you, right? And this is someone who loves us, and we know. Yeah. But I'm glad you got that. And I'm so glad you could hear it the way it was intended.
And she was, fortunately for me, she was not the first one. So had a lot of gifts. It was like Christmas, really. But
I think, by the way, I just want to say it's one of the important reasons for managers who are shy about giving feedback is there is something about hearing things over and over and over again that does change people. If I hear something once, it's probably hard for me to act on it. It's hard for me to take it in. But if I've heard it for the 20th time, it's like, by the time we hear it for the 20th time, we're probably willing to give it some credence.
Excellent. Yeah. So what we've done so far, and my acting skills obviously are not as good as yours with over 20 years of acting experience. But I think people get the point, and this type of thing can be applied no matter what kind of conversation or difficult conversation you need to have with people. I say need is sort of like ideally you would. And so when it's coworkers to coworkers, these are some great tools to use. But you touched on management here just a little bit. And I wonder if we can address real quick just the idea of, if I'm a manager, I might feel, since I have the authority to correct and shape people's behavior, there's probably a good way to go about facilitating resolution to conflict, or just stopping it before it even starts.
Boy, yeah. So one of the things that I imagine about your business, Chris, is that many managers last week were baristas, right? That people get promoted in the stores. And so now suddenly they're managing people that yesterday were their peers. And that can be weird and uncomfortable. But also, too, that managers in their first couple of years are trying to figure out what management really is and how do you do it. One of the things that I want to say big time is don't take it personally. Your job is to manage performance. That's your job now, is to give feedback, observe things and give feedback. So, yeah, in terms of avoiding conflict, part of it is not about you, right? If you're going to come to me and give me feedback about how I'm making that drink or whatever it is, or showing up for, how about punctuality, right? That can be a really hard one,
Yeah.
right? So if I'm going to talk to you about punctuality, I can pretty much guarantee that you're going to A, have feelings about it, and B, feel like your identity is under threat. And so I'm going to pretty much guarantee that you are not going to be like, oh, really? Tell me all about my punctuality problem. You're going to probably get someone who's defensive. Don't take it personally. Don't take it personally. It's just your job and it's their job, right? And so I think just to start with, that's really important. Is it's your job to have these conversations, whether they're comfortable or uncomfortable, and conflict is in the eye of the beholder. One of the things that I learned, and I learned this I literally learned this as a skill, is when someone's emotion is coming at me, right? They're defensive, they're angry, they're attacking me, to have a sense of being unplugged, because emotions are contagious. By the way, this has been proven scientifically that emotions jump between people the way like a jumping spider jumps.
Ugh.
You can't. And so but I wanted to give you that image, right? Is that when you come at me with your lips curled and your eyes squinty and, like I can see that you're angry, it is natural that I will have an emotion about that. To not have an emotion about that is really hard work. And so what I learned as a skill was to say to you, I see how upset you are, but to not have the feeling myself. It's not my feeling. And so one of the ways that you can bring conflict to an end as a manager is don't get infected, right? Stay in that front part of your brain, not the back part of your brain, not the olive pit part of your brain, but stay in the front. I see how upset you are. Chris, my preference would be to not talk about this when you're upset.
Well, that cuts it off at the knees, doesn't it?
Well, at least it gives it a timeout. It doesn't mean I won't talk to you about it.
Right.
But time out. And by the way, we do this with little children when they're having a tantrum. I mean, look, I see some people, at CVS or whatever, trying to talk to their child while their child is having a tantrum. Their child can't hear. Their child's having a tantrum. Shut up. So the same thing is true for you. You're in the middle of this hijack. Like, I'm going to try and talk to you right now. What's the point? Time out.
Guilty here as a dad. Yeah, for sure.
Right. So that's in terms of that management skill that I think managers can really benefit from, is don't get infected with somebody else's thing. Don't you come at the conversation with emotion. It's just business, right? It's not your identity that's at stake. It doesn't mean you're a good or a bad boss. Calm down. You can take a time out. That's all good. The other thing that I can suggest is this idea of pay attention. My guess is that you might sense when people are upset. You might be the person who looks and goes, oh, look, Brianna's been upset for 3 days. Why aren't you talking to Brianna? You're the manager. So you have to kind of take a breath, have a conversation that's going to be difficult. But how do you end conflict is address it. Go figure out what's going on. Go have a conversation with her.
Yeah, I think we also, as managers, like you say, we just let things go for a long time and are uncomfortable with our authority.
Yeah. If people want to read a really nice book about all this conflict stuff, this book is really friendly. It's got a lot of really simple tools, and it is a book that is used in the corporate community over and over and over again. People usually do a 1, 2, or 3 day course on this book. It's called Crucial Conversations, Talking When the Stakes Are High. And it's got lots of examples, and some are work examples, but some are, couples at home. Some are, talking with a teacher. It's all kinds of stuff, and it's just helpful. So that's a resource for people if they'd like to get better at these things. You can learn these things.
Excellent. Yeah. Sometimes we feel like we are stuck in the skin we're in, and we can't really change who we are. But if you remember who you were 10 years ago, that's probably a thought that you won't have again, because we're mostly different than we were.
That's a great example. Yes, that's right. It's an evolution, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think the tools that we talked about here, the tools that we already have and are already using by what you've explained in this episode, I feel are going to be able to be utilized more to our advantage so that there can be more harmony at work. Because, as I was mentioning to you before starting our recording today, we had a competition here in town. Everyone's coming together for coffee and around a common goal. And unnecessary conflict just puts a speed bump on the progress we make as an industry. And I think it goes for any industry. So if we can all do our parts and utilize what you've been teaching us here today, I think we're going to be all the better for it.
Great.
Thank you so much for your time, Tom. I'm extraordinarily grateful that you decided to join me on the show today. It was an honor, and I want to ask, where can people find more of your work? How can they get in touch with you and benefit more from the wisdom that you have to offer?
So there's two places. One is the podcast that I do once a month. I've been publishing it since 2008. It's called The Look and Sound of Leadership. So people can get that podcast. The other is on my website, I run a company called Essential Communications, and the website is essentialcomm with two M's, essentialcomm.com. And there's every episode of the podcast is also a PDF. You can download it. There's PDFs that you can download. There's just lots and lots and lots of resources on that website, and people should go and help themselves.
Excellent. Are you online anywhere on Instagram or anything like that?
I'm on LinkedIn, and I publish there, and I publish in the Forbes Coaches Council. So
Nice.
that's really the places where I am online most.
Excellent. We'll link to all those in our show notes here as well. So thank you so much, Tom. And it's been a blast.
It has, and thanks for having me.
So here we are. We have just covered a very critical topic, and that is basically difficult conversations that we need to have with our coworkers, or that we should have with our coworkers, and ways that we can leverage the 3 conversations that are already happening within us. The conversation of what happened, what's my perception of what's going on here? What do I feel about it? The feelings conversation, and how it impacts our identity and the things that we value about who we believe ourselves to be in the world. And as Tom described here, there are some good ways to go about engaging in these conversations, and maybe some not so good ways. We kept circling back to charitable assumption and having a view of others that's generous from the start is the first step toward peace between people. In the coffee industry, we talk about how we want to come together, and coffee is about community. And oftentimes when we describe community in coffee, we don't necessarily reference the coworker community. We reference the community that comes together during trade shows. And in a sense, it's easy to find unity because it's an artificial environment. When you're only with people for 2 days or 3 days, I find it's easy to, be nice and smile. You don't really go through a lot of ups and downs. But when you're working the rush with somebody who you feel is not pulling their weight, when you have to have a conversation with somebody about the way that they're behaving or the words they're using with you that make you feel a certain way, these are the kind of conflicts that come up more often because we're in the thick of work. And we might be at our weakest, and we're tired, we're over-caffeinated or under-caffeinated, depending on what shift you're working. This is critical that we get a handle on this as a community, because if we don't have quality conversations amongst ourselves and take the initiative to both be charitable in our view of others and take the first step toward peace, then what's going to happen is we're just going to impede our progress as an industry. And I think most of us want to get along with each other. So I recommend that you go back into this episode, re-listen to what we're talking about when it comes to involving yourself as a part of this solution and not just blaming people around you. Be curious about what's going on. Be charitable in your assumption about what people are doing or saying, and don't try to engage in these conversations with people when you're having a lot of feelings. I know personally that I have had lots of conversations with people when I shouldn't have, but it felt right. And the ability to just put it on hold for a second and then come back to it with a more objective viewpoint. And like Tom was said, you're going to think about those conversations. You're going to think about what happened, how it made you feel, and how it impacts your identity overnight until you get the opportunity to sit down with that friend, with that coworker, and hash it out. We all want to be understood. We all want to be perceived, like Tom says in his show, the way we want to be perceived. And if we can think that about the other person too, and come to them in this generous and positive way, even if it's conflict that we have to bring up, at least we've started from a position of benevolence and not one of animosity and against them or against what they're doing. Rather, we are coming at it from a position of being for them and for the relationship. And ultimately, if we are for one another and we can utilize these things effectively, then we are going to be that much more effective as a community and a lot healthier too. So my thanks again to Tom for coming onto the show and just breaking down what it means to have these types of conversations and helping us with these tools that'll develop our careers, develop us as a person, and also develop our industry and our community. You can find the show notes for this episode that also has the links to the book Crucial Conversations that Tom was talking about and how to get in contact with Tom. If you want to reach out to me directly, you have a question, a concern, a suggestion, ways that I can improve this show, I am all ears. You can do that by emailing chris@keystotheshop.com, and I'll look forward to hearing from you. So go now and take what you've learned here in this episode, apply it to your bar. Who is it that you need to have a conversation with? Maybe you've been thinking about that person on the bar that has been a thorn in your side, or maybe even that you are that person. There's a conversation that needs to happen at some point, and the worst thing that can happen is that it never gets discussed at all. And I hope that this episode has given you some tools and some encouragement and insights to be able to have a healthy dialogue that leads to some resolution. So thanks once more for spending time with me today. I'm honored to have you listen to the show. Have a great week. And as always, I hope that this episode, as well as all of our other past episodes on the show, have given you keys to the shop.